Hello, Bonsai friends. This is Evan Pardue of Underhill Bonsai, and welcome to episode 53 of Little Things for Bonsai People, the podcast. And this time I'm joined by my co-host, Carmen Leskobiensky. How's it going today?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Louisiana's doing its whole thing where it was 35 degrees about 5 nights ago, and now it's 80 degrees again outside.
Gross.
Yeah. And it's just been kind of up and down. I defoliated one of my trees and get one of my sweet gums is pushing buds right now for no reason. But that's just the way it is here. How are things starting to kind of go dormant where you're at? I'm pretty sure it's kind of past that point now, right?
No, it's been kind of a warm fall. We just the last couple of weeks have had, like the last week, really, the color in the maples has been really good. And everything's finally starting to kind of brown out. And it's been really gusty, windy lately. So the yard is just a mess. Like all the leaves are just on the ground. And so like you go through and try to clean it up. So it looks nice, but it's windy. So the leaves there's just more leaves that just blow down. So at this point, it's supposed to be really gusty today. So I'm hoping that takes care of most of the stuff so I can go through and clean it up once this week and pretty much be done with it. But yeah. So we're getting into dormancy. It's still fairly warm.
Here's the hoping that it's just windy enough where you don't have to sweep too much.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And today's topic is going to be about Semi-Cascade and Full Cascade. We're going to go back and revisit something that we were doing for a little while, and we kind of got off track because we were doing a lot of shows, and then we had a lot of guests, and then we had a lot of artsy fartsy stuff to talk about. So we're gonna go back to Bonsai Forms, the little series that we started quite a few episodes back, and like I said, we'll be talking about Semi-Cascade and Full Cascade styles. But before we get into that, I do need to mention that our podcast is sponsored by our amazing patrons over at patreon.com/little things for bonsai people. Head over there and become a bonsai best bud and hang out in the Discord with all these amazing people, starting off our list with Tori Solis, Vicky Auth, Boyd Snowborough, Ricky Rowans, Joshua Bentley, Snappy Chappers, Joel Jenkins, Justin Knight, Backyard Bonsai Australia, Greenwich Gardens, Taylor Peacock, Chase Petweet, Austin Adkins, Karen Codswell, Yuruin Bonsai Garden, Lewis Torres, AC Castle, Bonsai Marine, JAS Potts, Chris Fasoon, and Timothy Arsenault. And we have one more Bonsai Best Bud just joined recently. It's going to be Mr. Randy Bennett, who I interviewed quite a few episodes ago. It's probably about, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, it feels like. Time's going by pretty quick now, it seems. But yeah, thank you so much, Randy, for sponsoring the show and supporting, the further education of what we do here, educating as many people as we can about bonsai and making our show accessible. And every little bit more just helps us expand the sphere, I guess you could say, of our outreach and our capabilities and things and our resources here. So thank you guys so much for sponsoring the show. But we do have a ad read from Bonsai Bar, also a main sponsor of the show. Go ahead and read that ad read, Carmen.
This podcast is supported by Bonsai Bar, the beginner bonsai workshop popping up in breweries all across the Northeast. Bonsai Bar is 2 hours of tiny tree goodness disguised as a night out with friends. Come grab drinks, create a new tree, and watch as your friends and family get the bug for bonsai. Bonsai Bar is always looking for teachers and assistants, and you listen to this podcast, so you're probably already qualified. Bring your knowledge out to the bar. Apply today. Find event tickets, contact info, and more at bonsaibar.com.
Perfect. Your delivery on that ad read is just impeccable.
Thank you.
But we do have another ad read, a new sponsor for our show as well. It's going to be the event that's taking place in Collinsville, Illinois. Do you say Illinois or Illinois?
Illinois.
Yeah, I just did
one S.
I know. I do that. Yeah. Bonsai Central is going to be, like I said, it's going to be in Collinsville. It's going to be on May 3rd to May 5th of 2024. It is going to be a regional show, and it's a pretty big deal. It's the first time they'll be doing it. They have a whole lineup of amazing guest artists and lecturers. that are going to be at the show. So starting off that list, we're going to have Bjorn there. You're going to have Tyler Sarad, Maria Heidick, Andrew Robson, Young Cho, Miro Stemberger. Those are going to, just outstanding list of people there.
That's great. Yeah, that's very exciting.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like the next step in the way of having more regional shows similar to nationals, including some vendors. We got April Gridsby Ceramics, Vicky Chamberlain Earthwares, Toku Take Bonsai, which is, you said that was...
That's now, he's out here in the Portland area. Yeah. Really, really nice pottery, very up and coming.
Yes, that's definitely worth checking out. Byron Myrick, my guy from Mississippi over here that I deal with a lot, is going to be there. That's awesome. You definitely check out his stuff. Greenwich Gardens, one of the spots, one of our Bonsai Best Buds is going to be there. And
I know they've been collecting a lot of Yamadori, so I'm guessing they'll probably bring a bunch over.
Yep. And then yours truly, like Underhill, will be there, and that's something that's special, right?
It's pretty special.
But yeah, and then there's going to be workshops which include Kusamono with Young Cho, Large Twisted Junipers with Tyler Sarad, Hanuki Cypresses with Bjorn, Fused Trident Maples with Maria, and then Shohin, like I guess a continuation of the Shohin workshop that Andrew Robson's doing. So this is just going to be an amazing show, guys. There's going to be also a professional presentation and bonsai show that's going to be happening, just like the national show, just like the Pacific Expo that happened. And this one's unique because there's going to be cash prizes for the winner as well.
Ooh.
That's interesting. So you guys
Fabulous.
Can go over
Cash prizes.
Yeah. Go over to bonsai bonsai/central.com, and you can go be part of the convention in St. Louis. That's Collinsville, Illinois as well. That's the town that's outside of St. Louis, I'm guessing. And yeah, it's gonna be an awesome thing to do. This is one of those up and coming shows that they're hoping to run every year, and it's something to be part of. They call it Bonsai Central because they're bringing the best of the Midwest. And if this episode releases on the day that I think it will, it'll be 177 days till Bonsai Central. So that's the long-winded. Yeah, So, but that's my long-winded read for it. I'll be doing a couple of shorter versions of that, but just so you guys know, check out Bonsai Central. It's going to be an amazing show. And like we talk about on our show a lot, is that on our podcast show a lot, is that something's just going to see good bonsai in person makes a difference. It will really further along your expectations of what you are able to, see it's just in real life, IRL. Like bonsai just takes you to a different place and gives you expectations and gives you a learning curve that you just didn't know that you need when it comes to working on and developing bonsai, seeing the cuts and the branches where they need to be, seeing the pottery and the displays the proper way. But yeah, definitely check out that show. And also, I do need to mention that our editor, Matt, can't go any further without mentioning him. Matt O'Donnell, he makes it sound clean, makes it sound smart, cleans up the audio, makes it easy to listen to. Go over to mattodonnell.com. That's ODONNELL.com. And fill out a contact form to work on a podcast show with him that you might be starting up. Or if you want to work on some audio engineering with him, he's a set bassist in Nashville, Tennessee, and he's an all-around awesome guy. It's in the script. I read it every time. And then I failed to mention a little while back, but we do have little things for Bonsai people. T-shirts. I am running low on large and extra large on the two different styles that we put out recently, but you can go over to underhillbonsaistore.com and click on the link for little things on there, and you'll see the merch. We are going to be running new T-shirts in the future, hopefully soon. I got a couple designs in mind. I've just got to get to a certain point with these shirts that I have currently in the running, and then I will be printing a new batch. So
buy them so we can have more, please.
Yes. And I know I've had questions about shipping and stuff. I know some of the Bonsai Best Buds like, hey, where's my order? If you wouldn't mind going to the website, and I will make adjustments there, just put in the description or a note that you're a Bonsai Best Bud, and I will include the special Bonsai Best Bud discount for you. But yeah, go over there and buy the shirts from there. It makes my life easier so that I don't have 100 things I'm juggling literally a whole bunch of things apart from the nursery. So yeah, and that's a lot, man. That
was a lot.
Our show has come a long way. I mean, we got ad reads and patron support. Man, God,
pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I was kind of backtracking, looking at the show, and when Matt started editing. So, but also, if this is your first episode, I'm sorry. I'm just that's just a running joke. But no, this is your first episode. Make sure you go back to the previous episode before this one and go check out Matt. He was on the episode with us, critiquing a few trees and giving us some insight about what he thinks about art versus craft, and also comparing it to his music that he plays as well, and his experience in being a professional musician, how it crosses over. It's a very interesting chunk of content there. But yeah, going back and looking, we started this in January. It was actually January 17th of this year. And we're in November. This beginning of November, we've ran, I think, right over 40 episodes almost now, brand new ones formatted with you, Carmen, and Mike Lane, which we'll talk about Mike's shout outs later on in the episode, as we always do. But yeah, if y'all aren't aware of Mike from Florida. But yeah, this has been a great time. It's like I said, we feel like we're turning a stone like every episode. It's so exciting to just get on and record. So, but yeah,
it's been super fun.
But yeah, let's talk about Cascade and Semi-Cascade. So,
okay.
So I have quite a few things to say about Cascade styles, because I feel like there's a couple of different ways to approach this topic, because I think the Cascade style, it's kind of like the literati. It's kind of seen as like this. It's kind of one of the styles that like beginners gravitate towards fairly easy. Literati has its appeal because it's supposed to be like the artistic embodiment of bonsai. It's like, this is what you do whenever you're the master of bonsai. But then you see literati, and then you find something that's similar, and you're like, oh, I can do this. And if you go back to our episode about literati, you can see that there's a couple of keys. There's key words and key, I guess, expressions in bonsai that you need to understand before you get to literati. But then Cascade is the other.
I'm just going to jump in with literati. It looks so simple, but it's actually probably one of the hardest styles to create successfully. So yeah, I think Cascade is similar in that manner. And
I'm mentioning it because literati, it's just like, it seemed like you said, Carmen, it's like simple because you're like, oh, all I do is trim off a few branches and it's just tall and skinny, and it's in my opinion, sometimes when you try to get away with the certain literati forms, people make like these skimpy looking trees that don't necessarily have like the line we're looking for.
Right.
Whereas with Cascade trees, the reason why I'm comparing is like Cascade's like the bent over version of like an underdeveloped literatis that I've seen in the past. And this is because I work with, in my range especially, Green Mound Juniper or the Procumbens Nana, and they're a creeper. And so when people get their Green Mound Juniper, the first thing that they see when they take this tree, and they're like, how am I going to style this? It's a creeper, so it's like out of the pot and it's going downwards.
Yeah.
And the first thing is, oh, Cascade, easy, right? Trim a few branches, stick it in a tall pot, and you're done. But it's not, it's never that easy.
No.
So, and there's two different forms here. So we figured we would talk semi and full because they seem similar, but there's a lot of things to be said about both of those. And we were going to talk about slanting a little bit, but I feel like we should touch on slanting slightly, because I feel like there's a huge confusion of slanting to semi to full. So your kind of like take on Cascade styles though, how do you feel about them? What do you think about when you hear Cascade bonsai?
I think I first think of where I would find this tree in nature. So tumbling off of a cliff or on a riverbank, something like that, hanging off of a mountain. And so that kind of gives me a feel for, what I want to achieve in the design. And I think that I don't know what I think about these. But I think that's kind of where I go with Semi-Cascade, kind of a similar feeling of where you would find them in nature, but, maybe in a less precarious situation. Usually I like to think of some deadwood on them, because if they're in that kind of environment, where they're falling off of something, clinging to life, there's probably, some nice deadwood on there. So a lot of times I think of conifers for Cascade and Semi-Cascade, but you can really use any species for these styles. I think those are my quick thoughts.
And like when you mentioned with junipers, like conifers in general, that's going to be pretty much the most straightforward way to interpret a cascading style, in my opinion, because I've seen it. Like I've gone up to like Nashville and also through Ohio. You can see a lot of this too. And when you get into the Midwest area, you do have a lot more deciduous trees there. And those trees don't typically fall down the mountainside. Their growth habit is much more upright, slender trunks normally. In a stressful situation like that, where all they have is the cracks in the rocks and maybe like a small embankment of soil that just happened to collect on the top of a face of a rock somewhere. And these trees are just kind of there, and the roots can run down the side, and you'll have a rock slide or something will slip, and the trees will be on the side of the rock face, and you'll get this kind of semi-cascade deciduous tree. But they're typically going to grow up as much as possible, almost completely vertical, which is a cool look.
Get a really big U shape in that trunk. So like your tree fell over and went horizontal, but then it's phototropic, so, right? So it grows right back up towards the sun. So instead of kind of going down and down and down, it just kind of goes whoop right back up.
and that's a cool look, but that's not a cascade.
Right.
That's like a clinging to rock. Whereas the junipers or any other like conifer, I think because you have to keep in mind, guys, I'm in Southeast Louisiana, and I don't really get to go into the mountains as often as Carmen would be able to, and just
why not? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I visited the Rocky Mountains recently. But I couldn't tell you half the stuff I saw. I knew mostly conifers, but when conifers fan out into the sun, they will choose the easiest and most the most laxed route for them to be able to grow with less stress. So that's going to be just kind of downwards and out, and gradually fan outwards to get as much sun exposure. And I don't know, I know there's a few species of junipers that will grow up and out. That's definitely a thing, but they typically either fall over or hug rocks, and then you get this cascade look to them. And
a lot of times, especially up in the Rockies, there's so much snow load that where a deciduous tree might be able to shed some of that snow because it's so vertical. These conifers that are holding on to all their foliage, they just keep getting pushed and pushed and pushed. So some of them will still try to grow back up, but sometimes they're just continually pushed down and knocked over. And and at least even if your foliage is going up, I see this on a lot of collected ponderosa, the trunk is just kind of sideways and the foliage is all whoop, but because of the way the trunk is, it makes it really easy to kind of just push all that foliage over to create that semi-cascade or cascade look, because that trunk is already sideways.
Yeah. And that's a really great point too, is snow load, which is I feel like snow load is something that is a little more controversial in bonsai design. Yeah, because deciduous trees, usually when they get snow load, they drop their foliage, and so it's twigginess that will collect snow load sometimes. Older branches can get snow load on them and slightly weigh them down, but conifers, like you said, they always have a significant amount of foliage there, and it's always going to be dragged down and sometimes just straight up just buried. So, whenever I look at bonsai here and I see a branch that's been designed as if it were, pine tree style is kind of like the classic way to say it. It's like, where's the snow load at?
Yeah.
And so whether I'm doing a naturalistic styling of a bonsai or I'm doing a Japanese traditional style, I usually almost always go with, my deciduous trees going straight upwards. The branches can come out and they can go lateral because of the weight of the aged branch, but usually my branches tips go up, whereas junipers don't have to be confined to that. So when they're used for cascades, they're kind of a shoe-in, but there's more to just putting the tree downwards. So for mentioning the degrees of the slant into the full cascade, though, the slanting style can be mentioned a little bit because, which the slanting style is sakan style in Japanese, and slanting trees are kind of like, they're the rim of the forest kind of shape. So like if there's a bunch of trees that's really crowded, you got this older tree that's been there for a while, maybe there's a clear cut suddenly, and this older tree is leaning from the side of that grove. That's your best kind of way to look at it and appreciate slanting style trees in nature for comparison. But I've seen slant trees called semi-cascades, and that's where we get kind of convoluted here.
Right.
So
yeah, so a semi-cascade differs because that lowest branch comes down below the rim of the pot, but it doesn't go down past the feet of the pot. So it's got to go somewhere, within however big that pot is. It's got to be below the rim, above the feet. Whereas a slanting tree, everything is above the top lip of the pot. And then a full cascade, your branch goes below the feet of the pot. So one step farther than the semi-cascade, it goes all the way below your pot. So you need a tall stand, otherwise your branch is going to hit whatever you're trying to set your tree on.
Yeah. And what's the degree in which, because like with a slanting tree into a semi cascade, there's a degree off of the nabari up the trunk line that's usually seen in a slanting tree. But when you get to a semi cascade, the visual weight of the nabari versus the weight of the foliage, is that kind of where we're kind of separating the line here between slanting to semi-cascade?
No, I think it's really, where the branch goes. Slanting is usually, it's leaning, so it can be a tall tree. It doesn't have to be short. Semi-cascade is usually a little bit squatter. It kind of like how you would see I guess I've seen some tall semi-cascades, but I think it really is that low branch. How low is the lowest branch? So if your branch is below the rim of the pot, then you're in semi-cascade territory. But if you're not, then you're generally more into a leaning. It also depends where your crown is, right?
Yeah.
So your crown is, I think, farther over usually with a slanting tree, not above your root base. And generally that's, similar with cascade and semi-cascade, but sometimes they can be a little bit closer to your root base.
Is it like an obtuse triangle shape?
Let's see. Obtuse. I don't remember geometry. My triangles. So let's see, what triangles are there? There's isosceles, there's equilateral, and are there more triangles?
Oh, there's a lot of triangles. You can do so much with triangles. And I'm just saying that too, is because whenever we're building bonsai, I know a lot of people will try to get away from the triangle shape because the pointy top is what defeats some older trees. It's like, it doesn't feel old. It's too pointy at the top.
Right. Well, it doesn't have to be a triangle. It has to roughly fit into a triangle, but it shouldn't be pointy.
Yeah. So I think it would just be like an acute triangle. I think that's what I'm looking for, because the angle is acute off the slanting tree, where it puts the crown. It puts the crown like not above the nabari, but it is a very particular angle. So
About like 60 to 80 degrees relative to the ground, would you say?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, and that, it's not exact because we're doing bonsai. We're trying to be naturalistic, but the general outline of that is, 60 degrees is somewhere around a sweet spot. And I mean, like 10 degrees difference, maybe up or down. But there's a lot of weight in the slant style. And so the weight is going to help us kind of pull the tree back the other direction so it doesn't feel like it's falling over. Whereas a semi-cascade, the weight of the foliage is shifted. So there is a triangle there, but it's so much more significantly shifted, and you keep seeing the first branch. And does it have to be the first branch that drops below the rim, or do you just start going to a cascade, or is that that's where I kind of like we start playing around with these thoughts of what does cascade mean,
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I generally think it's that first lowest branch or your whole trunk line. It doesn't have to be a branch. It could be the entire trunk line is going kind of over and down. But yeah, generally it's, the lowest part of your tree is going down below the rim of the pot for semi-cascade.
Yeah. I mean, so then it kind of shifts the whole thing. Do you build the tree like a normal bonsai, and then you just take your first branch and let it just grow and grow and have like almost an extended like first branch, like exaggerate it that goes down? Or do you shift the weight? Like you have a trunk line that's kind of compressed, like a little kind of just back and forth, and then the bulk of your tree starts shifted to the side and down slightly.
Yeah.
So it looks like the tree is almost resting on the rim. I've seen those as well.
So with slanting, I mean, your general movement is up and over, right? And so with the semi-cascade, it's kind of over and down. And then full cascade is over and way down. So yeah, so with a with a slanting tree, you can get something really tall or taller or, whatever. You generally wouldn't have a low branch. It would not usually make sense for, a slanting tree very strongly going up one direction to have another branch going way down the other direction. But so where your trunk line is shifted as well. Yeah.
There's this really awesome image. I can't remember if it's in Bonsai Techniques 1, the John Naka book, or not. I think it is. But there's this illustration where he has, let me see if I can find it. Bonsai Styles Mountain, I guess. See if that pops up. Because there's a really nice image. Yeah. And I will see if I can find a good source. So this website, it's called prettybonsai.com prettybonsai.com/bonsai-styles is what they have this under. And this image has been used a bunch of times. But it shows the formal upright at the base where it's very flat. And then it gets closer to this mountain and you get this taller, skinnier kind of formal upright style. And then you go up a little bit slightly and you get this slant. Do you see what I'm talking about?
I know what you're saying. Yeah, I've seen that image before.
And then it goes up and then there's suddenly like a flat part a little bit, but it's still on the side. So you get like a miyogi, like an informal a little bit. And then it goes up more and you start seeing the semi-cascades and the full cascades. So the semi-cascades, it looks like here in this picture, is that they are the ones that kind of don't break the tree line just yet. Like there's just enough crowding in the wherever forest setting they are in. Maybe there's a lush forest and they're not breaking the tree line of the mountainside yet. And they're fighting to get out, similar to how a informal tree or a slanting tree would be. But one of the best ways is down and out. Whereas the full cascade in the picture here is the very, very top. And this is one thing that I've heard about, and just so we can kind of learn the names of the style too. We've talked about a couple of the Japanese names for these styles. We get Kinji, or the Han Kinji, which Han Kinji is the semi-cascade, and then Kinji is the full cascade. Or Kinjai. Gai.
Oh, I think it's Kengai.
Kingai. See, Kinji. Kingai. But yeah, Kingai. Like, how you doing, my guy? But yeah, so the full cascade coming from the top. This is this is where it gets a little bit more convoluted, in my opinion. Is the semi-cascade, like you said, the first branch drops below the rim.
Mm-hmm.
The full cascade drops below the foot.
Right.
But I've also heard that the semi-cascade, the crown exists above the rim. In a full cascade, the crown can exist outside and below the rim, and even sometimes below the foot. How's that? How does that sound? Does that make it more confusing?
No, I think from my understanding, it can be a full cascade even if the canopy is above the rim of the pot. I think it more relates to where the lowest part of the tree is. Okay.
Then let's throw another thing into the mix a little bit to kind of confuse you more. So the crown is slightly above the rim in a semi. It could be below the rim in a full cascade, but also the percentage of the foliage mass in a semi-cascade, about 60% or so, is above the rim. In a full cascade, 80% to all of the foliage mass, not just the first branch, not just the dropping branch. Let me cut that. Not just the first branch, and not just the form and the line of the tree, but the whole bulk of the foliage mass is below the rim. Does that change things more?
I don't know. When we get to this kind of specific, I'm not sure. Because I just have always understood it as far as where that lowest branch is, or where the lowest point of the tree is. But I don't know specifically.
Yeah, because I've actually read in another book. It was one by Mr. Grout. He mentions that in his book as well. And I'm not saying that if we hear it different ways, doesn't mean what's right, what's wrong, and Mr. Dave DeGrout, very respectful man. I love his book, and he's curated the Pacific Rim, which is now the Pacific
Bonsai
Museum now. Yeah. And so it's just that's just another guideline to kind of help us envision and design a little bit more.
I think generally speaking, that's the case. But I'm thinking of a couple outliers that I know of in particular where their lowest branches fall below the feet of the pot, but the mass of their foliage is not below the feet of the pot. And I definitely wouldn't consider it a semi-cascade. But I also don't know that I'd consider it a full cascade. It just has a cascading branch. It's very strange. I don't really know how I would classify that one. So, but I think generally speaking, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And see, it's just as complicated, if not more complicated than how we would look at literati forms. Literati is more of a feeling, whereas a cascade form, in order to execute one correctly, we kind of have to think about all these things that me and Carmen are kind of going back and forth here on. It's well, if someone said this, then what does this mean? Then doesn't this mean this? So it's a really interesting form. Unfortunately, I don't get to work with a whole lot here. For the cascades and stuff that I get to do, I have to literally just develop them from raw stock, from garden junipers, are usually what I have. But as far as your experience, Carmen, what other species do you usually get to work with in the semi to full cascade?
We really don't work with, or I haven't even really worked with that many cascades or semi-cascades. I've seen Chinese elm, I've seen azalea, juniper, obviously, Yellow cedars make a great semi-cascade. I worked on one of those recently. Let's see. I'm trying to think what else I've seen recently. I mean, I know I've seen maple cascades or semi-cascades, and they're really interesting.
And
But you don't really see them as much, I don't think. I've seen a few pines in the cascade form.
is it appropriate for a pine to cascade?
It depends.
Yeah.
As with everything in bonsai, it's our standard answer. It depends.
Yeah.
If your trunk is right, yeah, you can totally do it. I think generally they fall more into a semi-cascade style than full cascade, but there's one out back here that we're going to be cascading within the next year or so. Which again, it's not a common style for this. It's a shore pine. It's not something you generally see in that style, but when you have a tree that's already different, then you can just keep being different with it.
Mm-hmm. And usually with cascades, and I've seen some really awesome ones. I know have I seen like larches and mountain hemlock
Mm-hmm.
and other and spruces that do this every once in a while. There was a few of them at nationals, I remember, right?
Yeah, I remember there was a really cool larch that was just completely out of the pot, essentially. Like it just was hanging out of there.
Yeah. And you have some of these really severe drops in some of these cascades. And I feel like some of the more appropriate cascade forms are trees that literally were cascading at the time of collection.
Yep.
But doesn't mean that you can't do it with raw stock or field grown material.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a feeling that some of those trees have. And that's what, and it kind of brings me back a little bit further to the beginning of when I'm like, oh yeah, so one of the things that I go back to is like some junipers can just fall victim to that. Oh, it's going downwards. Let's just do a cascade with this.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have the trunk or the angle or a dead wood that kind of tells the story of a cascade, because usually the best cascades have the story of how they cascade. Dead wood in certain areas where it just kind of tells you this is where the trunk existed at one point, the previous trunk before this new branch became the tree, or there's a huge obvious scar where the load snapped the tree almost in half, and then you see the heartwood has turned into this rugged, sun-beaten dead wood, and so that's really hard to pull off on certain species as well, like especially like softwood, junipers, pine trees, maples. Now
that I'm thinking about it, though, we've got a vine maple that's a full cascade here, and I think a lot of it depends on, again, where you're collecting, like you said, because I'm pretty sure this one came off of a mountainside, and so if you can find these uncommon species already growing in this form, but I think generally speaking, you're right that there's certain species that already have that feeling of cascade because they're cascading in nature.
Yeah. And I mean, Japanese maples can do really awesome semi-cascade
for sure
stuff. Because that's another thing to mention is a little bit is like what's not suitable for cascade styles. And that kind of like you hit like this hard line of like people who will probably get frustrated when you tell them you can't make a certain species cascade, and they'll tell you, well, I saw one before. And it's like with the Japanese maple, it's an outlier tree, in my opinion, because their habit is creek and riverside. And so the runoff from the way that it erodes the shore of a creek or a river, that tree will gradually kind of fall over onto the water and kind of drape its branches and leaves low against the water. And because it's an understory tree, it has a tendency to grow outwards and fan outwards as opposed to growing straight upwards. And so you get this quote unquote semi-cascade, or waterfall is kind of what they call the Japanese maple in those semi-cascade styles. And it's just to kind of show that more graceful, that more feminine style of that cascade with the Japanese maple. And so that's suitable. So when I heard you say earlier, you're like, we've seen a Chinese elm.
Mhm.
Fine. Like Chinese elm can be a big tree, or if it was crushed by a stone in the mountains, it wouldn't become necessarily a cascading plant. It would become more of like a bush. Because they have a bushing like habit almost for a tree. They're kind of a weird tree. And so that's a challenging one there. But you do, I mean, I don't know what it is, but why this is a thing, but I can think of 3 cascading elm trees, like 2 are Chinese elm that I've seen in person. And then there's one that I know Harry has I don't think it's a cascade. Is it he's got hawthorns that cascade, but he has enough hills out there in England. But yeah, I could have sworn I saw a cascading elm from him as well. So that's like the elm trees kind of slide into that category. And I don't know why. I
think you can make a cascade out of anything. I'm one of those people. You can do it and you can do it well. But I think more commonly, if you're trying to make something really believable to your area, you're going to want to stick with something that you've seen in your area, Yeah.
There was a very challenging, there's this one species that I work with quite regularly. I don't know if I mention it often. Not
the bald cypress?
Not many people know of it, probably heard of it. It's like a hipster species. It's, Taxodium descendens. Ascendens and Taxodium decidum. So yeah, but anyway, bald cypresses. I saw this challenging tree one time, and it was a semi-cascade bald cypress, and I'm just like, like that's where it's like, where does the line get drawn on what is suitable cascade material? I could agree with a cypress tree that got blown over in a storm, and then as it was blown over, another tree fell on it and cracked the trunk, and then it curved downwards off of a slope of the bayou has a little bit of a drop, but we're so low here, it's hard to find a hill that's steep enough for the tree to get anything like that going on. And even still, like I had said earlier, when we started talking about cascade forms and what happens in bonsai with this, is that it's going to fight to grow upwards. So then I feel like we would turn into a raft style faster than we would turn into.
Probably be more likely. But I mean, there's also, this abstract and artistic element of things where it doesn't necessarily have to be something you would always see in nature. It could be, an artistic expression of, this species as this thing that you don't usually see it as, but it's really interesting because it's a novelty. And that really falls into are we going for more naturalistic bonsai or more stylized here? And I think there's a lot of, personal preference related to that.
And there's a lot of crossover too with some species that I just look at and I'm like, I don't know. Like you said, this is as expression, it's fantasy world in some instances. I mean, we literally just started thinking and talking to Laurent about cosmic, which cosmic is a combination of all the styles, is one of the things that he told me. And so it's just like this whole thing. It's like, so if we have cascading trees and we have like this kind of outline of what's expected, especially from like a juniper cascade, what about the combination of styles too? Could a forest planting cascade? Is that possible? Like, is there an entire forest of junipers that are cascading in the same container? Would that feel realistic, or would that feel weird?
That would feel really weird.
Yeah,
I think. But
if it was done well, and
then anything goes.
Yeah,
if you can do it well. I just want people to convince me.
Yeah. I mean, I could think about like Chinese Beijing, where you have the rock plantings where there's multiple trees.
Yeah.
On there, that it's like, that's technically a cascading forest.
Right. Yeah, but when you think of a forest planting, there's always something in a forest that's the tallest, and so it doesn't make sense that everything would be cascading. Yeah. Because that's just not how forests grow.
And I'm pretty sure me and you have had this conversation like earlier on about like abstract styles and stuff like that. It's like, cascade forest. Every tree goes below the rim.
And I'd love to see that. If anybody can do it, I'd go for it. But yeah, I don't know how you would do it.
In a proper container, not just your rock But you know what would be interesting is if you did have like a Cascade container that was tall to give way for the form. We need to talk about pots in just a moment too, with Cascade forms. What if you had the rock that was angled and you just so happen to get your hands, you got lucky to get this rock that had like up, out, and down, and then you could put the forest planting onto that rock. And they all cascaded off there. It would look like something out of like the Avatar of the Blue People kind of universe kind of thing. It'd be kind of weird. But
would it still be a forest though, or would it be a mountainside? Is a forest on a mountainside?
Would it be a corrosion?
But are there juniper forests? I don't know. It's so, that would be so abstract.
Yep.
But
and so
could do it.
I think one of the things before we move on to like pots for Cascades is like, usually with Cascades, I think this is also another thing that's a big draw to the style when people want to create a tree is that Cascade style, when I think of a full Cascade and something with lots of dead wood in a story, it's always a stoic tree in my mind. Like a tree that's really withstood the elements, and it's like one of its last it's like one of the last of its like colony of that species in that area because of like environmental changes, survival of the fittest. There's so much oxygen. There's only so much oxygen. There's only so much surface area the tree can cover. And so it is like it's a lonesome kind of feeling style in my opinion. So like if we have like a severe Cascade, like a Cascade where the whole trunk, all the foliage drops below the pot. Like that would probably never work for a multi-tree planting. Because why would there be so many trees? Like why is it so lush?
It doesn't make sense. The story isn't there.
It should be more barren filling, The use of decorative moss in display is a little bit more controversial in that display. But yeah, we could talk about pots for Cascade styles a little bit, because there's a really distinct way that we can approach it. Is that just by using the instead of using a shallow, we just use a deep pot. But what is the dimensions on that pot?
Right. I mean, personally, I don't love the traditional Cascade pots. I think they're kind of boring. I prefer the Cascades in something that's a little bit, I would prefer a shallower pot on a taller stand or something like that, as opposed to a big, tall pot. I just think in general, the big, deep pots can cause, root bound issues or water infiltration issues, whereas the shallower pot's going to probably be better for your tree long term. But I mean, the benefit of those really tall pots is that, you can set your pot on a bench and your tree doesn't necessarily hit the bench. So yeah.
I think it's the question of stability too. It's like I'm doing like a old school kind of feel, classical style Cascade, and the pot is so tall and so skinny. I know when beginners get into bonsai and they're like, look at this bonsai pot. This thing's insane. It's like a tower. It's like a monolith of a bonsai pot. And they're like, oh, I wish I could put a tree in that. And when the tree is supposed to be roughly the 50%, it should be more in some cases of the show. And then the container is so overwhelming. It's difficult to use that type of pot. It's so big. There's so much pot to show there, and it's that challenge. It's from like my favorite thing in all of bonsai. It's just my preference is like the big shallow, like maybe like an inch, maybe 2 inches, wide tray style pot with this beautiful deciduous informal upright, big full canopy. And so the tree has so much presence that it takes the pot, and the pot's just a complement of like the earth and the ground below. But then the Cascade pot, it's like so vertical, it calls attention to it immediately when it's so tall. And then you have a question of stability, like how skinny is the pot? Like, will the wind just like blow it over when it's 5 mile gust, 5 mile an hour gust one day? Like you have to tie it down. Like you said, with you at the shallower containers, though, you always have to put your tree like on a stand,
or on the edge of a bench hanging off.
Now, on the edge of the bench is interesting, but also very dangerous because...
Oh, yeah. Tie it down if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
And watch where you're walking.
Yeah.
You'll bump into it.
Frequent visitors to your garden, it's not your visitor's fault that they knock your cascade tree off your bench. It's always your fault because you're the ultimate caretaker for the tree. And if you got edges and branches sticking out and stuff, and it gets caught on someone's clothes and it's not tied down, that's always an issue. So pros and cons of like cascade style. Pro is that it looks cool. It's going and as long as your entire collection is not cascades, which, like I was saying, like, you know, there's nothing wrong with getting into bonsai and having the green mountain juniper, and you're like, oh, okay, I like this one, and you get another one and another one and another one, and all of a sudden all of your green mountain junipers are just cascade trees. So it has to be special, and it has to be. It doesn't have to be collected material, but if you're gonna make a cascade, I would say, you know, in some places it's more common, but for here it's like if I had a cascade, I would have like one.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
yeah,
two.
You don't usually see many of them in people's collections, just one or two.
And the maintenance is really difficult on them as well.
It can be.
It can be. It's going to be a little bit more of a curve, like a learning curve, as opposed to if you were just to start with a regular, you know, upright style too.
For sure.
Because, you know, like, yeah, you get to tie it down. You have to be conscientious of moving around your bench. But also when it comes to the way that the tree is in the container, what we're used to with bonsai and shallow containers, when we water it, that it'll puddle up and then it'll run out the bottom, and there won't be so much water column. That's kind of where I'm going with this. It's like water column is really against you in a cascade pot as well. So I know instances where people will, like you said, like you'll get like Carmen said earlier, you'll get like you'll get a root bound tree.
Yeah, how are you going to get it out of a pot that's a foot deep and 6 inches wide?
Then you can
you have to break the pot
theoretically, if your lip of your pot, that's the interior lip, is curved inwards. God bless you.
God.
Yeah, I like you said, you're going to probably have to break that thing off of there. That's where the interior of your pot should be made with craftsmanship to help you get that tree out of that pot easier, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the other issue that often people run into with cascades is, you know, most trees are apically dominant, right? So the tops of the trees want to be stronger. And if you have a branch that's very low on your tree and, you know, it's probably getting a little bit more shade, it's like below the root level, really, if you're in a full cascade, it's going to generally be a weaker branch. So you need to be sure that you're taking care of your tree in a way that keeps the balance of that tree, so that low branch is getting enough of the energy. So, you know, keeping more foliage on it, really controlling your top growth, making sure that low branch is positioned into the right amount of light, and all of these different things. Occasionally I've seen with weak cascades, people temporarily setting the pot on an angle so that branch is actually going up, you know, for a season or so. Yeah. Just so that it kind of regains some of that apical, you know, it gets more attention from the tree because it's going up instead of hanging all the way down. But that's something that you really commonly see with cascades, is a weak low branch. So something you really need to watch out for there.
I really like that little trick, like leaning the tree sideways to trick the tree into basically being like, oh, I am dominant in this area right now.
Yeah, the only issue with that is that because plants are phototropic, right, your foliage is going to reorient to that angle. So if you're going to show that tree that's, you know, that year, maybe don't, you know, make sure that your foliage is reoriented to the correct position before you put it in a show, because otherwise it's going to look ridiculous.
It's going to be really obvious. I mean, unless you want to sit there and wire it all back out properly.
Right. Yeah.
But usually
that's something.
That.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, generally that's for a weak tree. So you wouldn't usually be showing something at that year anyway. You know, it's a rest year for the tree.
Yeah. And like you'd mentioned, that like thinning out the top was something that that's kind of like part of the maintenance, is like thinning the top out and matching that lower branch with energy more, and encouraging it to become more of a contributor to the tree, because they can get, I've seen it on a lot of cascades where that lower branch can get so weak it'll just end up dying, or you'll have barely enough for it's not even really a branch. Like the tree doesn't care about it. It's not going to put energy into it because it's not necessary anymore. So that's just a lot of the things. And like, go back to the water column thing, is like when you water a cascade versus a tree in a shallow container, and when you water a tree in a shallow container, it pulls up. It has nowhere else to go. So it hits the sides, it kind of does its thing, and then it gathers up and then goes through the drain holes, where it's with like a long water column on a cascade pot. Water column, if you all are not familiar with that, means that's the gravity of the water. So it's much taller. And so when you water the tree, it's going to go straight to the bottom. It's not going to pull up. And I don't know where on your cascade, if the core of your root system is going to be higher. In some cases, if the core of your root system could be midway, there could be instance where somebody will choose a deeper cascade pot for their tree, where they're like, I can't cut the root ball off because I know there's vital roots, and it's at the bottom. And so it's just like, there's so many varying degrees. So unless you have been able to excavate that root ball, really figure out where the heart of that root system is, you need to make sure that does never dry out. Because if it dries out, if a cascade plant with a deep pot dries out, you're in like deep doo-doo.
Good luck. You're gonna have to soak that puppy. Yeah,
you're gonna have to catch it before it happens, because usually when it happens, something bad will happen. You'll weaken the tree in some, irreversible way in the worst cases. But yeah, soaking it is a good way to go about it. But we don't want to. But
if you're that far gone, it might be too late.
Yeah, and you don't want to have to soak your trees every single day. No. Like Shohin, Kosamono, soak them. Smaller plants, there's a lot more leverage. But when you have bigger cascade, you're like, oh, I got to soak this thing. And the pot could be anywhere from 6 inches tall to a foot to, I've seen like 2 foot tall tree pots, just ridiculously tall cascade pots. How are you going to soak that? So if there's a couple of different tricks you could probably use, like we joked about the bamboo straw stuck into an azalea's root system to feed the densest part of it. That's an idea to get water into the core for a cascade. If you're scared, you're like, oh, this thing's root bound. And if you're watering, it becomes hydrophobic and sheds the water around the sides, and the water column's pulling it faster down than it can even get to the point where saturation can even start to occur. I mean, that's kind of where we get into this thing where it's like, I do like your mention, Carmen, of like, I love the ones that are in the shallow containers. I hear that, and that does help fix part of that issue. So, but yeah, and I mean, and it kind of comes around to like, also is like, I've seen some cascades that are also in like your moss ball muck entrapments.
Yep.
And it's kind of the same thing, but it's not the same thing, because there's not like a solid barrier of like clay wall guiding that water down.
Yeah.
So,
if they get hydrophobic, it's, they don't usually go that far, but occasionally you have to hit them multiple times, or the small ones, dunk them, if they get a little bit too dry. But it's much easier to rehydrate, or to dig a little hole through the kind of muck wall to get water back into it if you have to.
Yeah. And I know best case scenario for watering your cascading trees with like long, tall, deep pots of some kind is water it. This is a rule of thumb that I use. I don't know how correct it is. This is, I mean, like we're saying, like this show has kind of gotten to a point now where we're giving all this advice, and we're talking about seasonal stuff that applies to where we're at, but don't take it as a grain of salt, but also, a grain of sand, or whatever, grain of salt, same thing,
salt,
I guess.
You were right with salt.
Yeah. But, like things are different because of humidity and temperature and elevation and, quality of water and minerals. And, but like, kind of like how I approach it with some of my trees that are harder to water is I water my tree and I make sure I see water coming out the bottom, but I get good saturation on the entirety of the soil surface. And I come back 15 minutes later because it's woken up the particles a little bit and kind of gotten the exterior of that wet. So it's more likely to trap the next run of water, and the oxygen will be pushed out and will be kind of like, it won't be like in a vacuum. It'll be more of like a negative pressure on the root system a little bit, I guess, because it'll kind of break down that barrier of what needed to be wet. And it might pull the water in there easier. I don't know exactly the science on that. It's just kind of a theory on how I water my trees. But yeah.
Well, water adheres to itself, right? So if you put some water in there and then give it some time to absorb and then water it again, you've got more water in there to pull more water into it. And it just,
electrons.
It just, science. Science is it.
Yeah. Don't make me talk about science.
We do that with our trees too. When we water, we go on each side of the bench. We don't give it a full 15 minutes usually. Occasionally, there's one or two trees I'll water the whole yard and come back and hit it again because I know that it is really hard to get the water into the pot. But yeah, we water like one side of the bench thoroughly, and then we go to the other side of the bench. And so by the time you make it back to that tree, it's had a second or two to it's had a little bit of time to infiltrate the soil, and then you hit it a second time, and that really completes the soaking process. Yeah
And 15 minutes is just a gauge because like with you, Carmen, you're in a bonsai yard, and so you're just on the trees, and say I'm getting up in the morning, making my breakfast, taking care of my wife and the house and the dogs and the chickens and everything else, and so I had to put it into a time schedule. And it's to help people kind of break that down in their mind a little easier. It's like, oh, well, now I have to go to work. My work is at the nursery, but, I keep working with bonsai. But when it comes to personal trees outside of bonsai collections and stuff like that, and I know that some of our listeners are people that work with professional collections and also curated collections. It's awesome that we have those listeners. So maybe that'll kind of help you ease your mind a little bit on those cascades. Because I know people who first get into watering trees and you get to this cascade, and your mentor or your oikato or your boss or whoever it might be is just like, make sure you water the cascade good. And you're just like, oh, crap.
What does that mean? I was watering everything good, I thought.
Yeah. It's just extra care needs to be given to that. And there's a couple of guidelines there for that too as well. So, but yeah, cascades are cool, man. I've seen my fair share of them. It's unfortunate for me. It's just my taste, my what's that? What's another word for it? Just I'll just say the simple way to layman terms is what I like. I'm not very fond of cascades. I do appreciate a good cascade though. The undeniable craftsmanship put into a good cascade with, good healthy tree, good pot, good display when it comes to displaying the tree. All those key factors, but I'm okay on them. But also I live in Louisiana, so it's not a lot of exposure. And if I was in Portland, if I was in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, or if I was you guys have them in Michigan too? Y'all have a lot of stuff like that?
Not a ton, but if you get some of the river banks, or when I went up to Niagara and I was hiking down along the river, there's just these cliffs. And so there was white cedar hanging off of the cliff. That was really cool. So we have some, but it's Michigan. We don't really have mountains. So, but some river banks, or, there's some rocky areas, especially in Ohio. So yeah, there's some of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a style that I feel like I was saying earlier, it's a lot of people want to go to it, and they kind of want to do something that, they look at the typical tree and you're like, oh, formal upright, informal upright, those are so boring. And you're like,
it's a very typical, what you imagine a bonsai would be is a juniper cascade. It's what you see in all the pictures. And
that's the thing that that you mentioned is you get those older books. And I don't want to poo-poo on any older publications. I mean,
poo-poo on them, please. No,
no, it's just it's the ones that were just written as hobbyists or knick-knack kind of feeling, or art garden kind of stuff.
Well, it doesn't help that Home Depot or the big box stores sell these little sad dead cascade junipers. Don't buy those.
Yeah, when you see the ones with the fake moss and the rocks glued on there.
The rocks are glued on there.
Yeah.
Oh, poor things.
In my range, I have a lot of Fukian tea. in our Lowe's and Home Depots where they grow. Where we have the derogatory term for that quality of bonsai is Malsai or roadside. But yeah, that is pretty common. Unfortunately, you see a lot of that. And if you're a first time listener, like I said, I'm sorry. But also if you're a first time bonsai person, you're really getting into this. Don't think that if you went and bought a tree from Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, off the side of the road, out of the mall, they have kiosks. I don't know if that's so common anymore because they used to.
I haven't seen it recently, but
yeah, but that was a common place for it too. And you just happen to buy a Cascade. Your Cascade's not a bad tree. You know, we're gonna some bonsai positivity. No tree is ugly. No tree is. But wow,
Okay.
Carmen. Jeez.
Some trees are really ugly.
Some trees are ugly on purpose, and it, like when it comes to beginners trees, like
To begin, just keep your tree alive and do your best with it. You know, everybody starts somewhere.
Yeah.
I think I started with a Cascade juniper. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, just remembering also, like doing this episode kind of brings the show back to earth a little bit too. Remembering what we're here for is truly for the beginners, because I mean, to kind of put it in perspective too. I mean, we're both young, or I like to believe I'm still young. I got gray hairs coming in now at this point.
Yeah,
all powdered on the sides, peppered on the sides more. But it's still young, but we're early on in this bonsai journey, and so like I mention this every once in a while. It's like it's exciting to see you and Mike progress alongside how it is, and it's really cool. So yeah, we have to remember with episodes and topics like this where we came from and what we need to concentrate on, because there needs to be more content for the basis. They're literally and figuratively the groundwork of bonsai.
And I had a student back when I was at the university bring in her little juniper that she had bought at a big box store, and she was like, help me. And so, we grew it out and we were starting to make it into actually like a nice little Cascade juniper. So you can turn them into nice little Cascades. It's not going to be, your number one, best in show right away, but you can grow a tree. It takes time, but you can make it into a nice little show hen if you put in the time and the energy. So it's generally not your best place to start, but if you have one, you can take care of it and make it look nice.
And kind of a reference to some of the bonsai forums, Facebook groups, and stuff like this too is like there tends to be a lot of negativity on those forums, so be careful out there. But just kind of the reason why I mentioned that whole thing is like I see people present these trees that they bought from a box store or something, or they got this Cascade juniper and they're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do something with this, and then they post online. They're like, what do you guys think? And then there's always that one person that says, put it in the ground. Oh, I'm always just like, ugh.
Don't put it in the ground.
Yeah,
put it in a bigger pot. Don't put it in the ground.
If you put it in the ground and grow it out, then your interest in bonsai might go away. You don't want to lose that.
Well, with the juniper, if you put it in the ground and ignore it, it's going to have no potential. You have to continually work on it 1 or 2 times a year, every year, regardless of how big it is, until it gets to what you want it to be. Otherwise, it's going to be impossible to work with.
Or you can just take the easy way out and just do deciduous trees. That was a roast on myself.
Do that, I guess.
and other people, but it's just.
I don't know if I'd say that's the easy way out.
I'm just joking. No, because
a different way out.
No, it's a different way, because theoretically you could take your elm or maple and stick it in the ground and then grow it out. And it's like, oh, look at this, but then you got to get it back out of the ground.
Yeah,
and that's usually pretty traumatic for a plant. That's why some of the better Yamadori are collected at a cost, because it's not ideal, especially for junipers and stuff where you get them out of the mountains and stuff, and for Cascade styles and stuff like that. Usually those trees are like taken out of rock crevices on screws.
They don't have roots anyway. Like you literally peel them off of like an inch of like decomposed granite. They got nothing.
Yeah, and then you stick them in a pot and they're like,
ooh, and then they grow crazy and then
and then they go crazy, and then
they've never had roots before.
Yeah, and then you can go in and you can take all those nice long running shoots down and wire them out and get something that it will build the tree. Whereas with a deciduous tree, and this is talking from, let's give you a little perspective on Louisiana here. I am at, I think I'm at 5 feet below sea level where I'm at. New Orleans is like 30 feet below sea level.
No wonder you get headaches when you come over here.
Yeah, it's real. It's a thing. Like when I went to the Rocky Mountains, I went to the top of I think it was Loveland or Leland Pass. It's like one of the higher elevations, like 7,000 or something. Like the headache was splitting, and I just couldn't see anything. Because I was literally the highest up I'd ever been, like on a mountain before. It was just like, oh, I've been on a plane, but like
that's pressurized. That's different.
Pressurized, but when there's no oxygen. It's different.
Yeah,
that's another way to kind of look at cascades too. It's like, go to where they are, and then you'll know. You're like, oh well, this tree is like dangling off the side and it's fighting for its life. And then you go to the Cascade Mountains or Rocky Mountains or Appalachian, and you go up into the highest peak, and you're like, holy crap! No wonder this thing's struggling, because I'm struggling right now. So, but yeah, down here in Louisiana, if we planted a deciduous tree in the ground, it's going to tap into the water table, and then your taproot and all of your fibrous roots are going to be in the ground where the water is, and it's going to be very hard to dig that tree up. So it's just with, and kind of going off of the beginner material just a little bit. Don't tell people to put their trees in the ground. Don't be that guy. So
I've never put a tree in the ground. And I don't intend to. Dun dun dun.
Yeah.
That's my personal choice.
So we're gonna do bonsai word of the week. You got a moment for that?
Yeah.
I don't know. We're doing really well in time here. We just kind of went through it. And now we're on. We've done so many bonsai words of the week, and I do this thing where it's like, I don't write down the ones that I've said.
I'll tell you, I'll remember if we've done it before. We could just do the different styles that we did today. We could use those words.
No, that's cheating.
Okay. Let's not do that. Let's not cheat.
So let's use a new word.
Okay. What's our word today?
I'm having to take a peek real quick. I've got a little catalog here of words that I could probably use. I just won't use the bonsai, like the Japanese terminology. I'm just gonna say bonsai word of the week is a bar branch.
A bar branch.
Or a handlebar branch.
Okay.
Because I feel like that's something else it's good to throw back in the mix of like some simpler terminology for the show again. It's like,
yeah, it doesn't have to be a Japanese word. It can just be a word that we use a lot, like a bar branch.
Like bar branch. So what is a bar branch, Carmen?
That is when you have two branches growing opposite of each other on a tree, so it looks like handlebars.
Yes. And are like a handlebar mustache or a handlebar on a bike?
Like a bike.
Oh, okay.
Mustache. Well, maybe a mustache.
I mean, you can't
if
have
they
a
go down enough
branch.
And then twirl back in. Cosmic bar branch.
Yeah. I used to have an amazing bar branch. I mean, handlebar mustache. I guess
you did. That was a pretty great mustache. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. So, but that was the old,
very impressive.
The old Evan. This is the new Evan. But no, the a bar branch on a tree is that wrong, or is it controversially wrong?
It's not ideal. If you have an old tree where branches have kind of become this, and there's no good way to fix it, but the tree has provenance because of its age, then in that case, it's often forgivable. If you are designing and building a tree, if you have a younger tree, if there's a way that you can fix it, then please fix it.
Yeah. The provenance and the age of the tree is something we talk about a lot of stuff like older trees and respecting the designs of older trees. It comes up very frequently in this show, I notice. So bar branches, in my opinion, happen in two places. Like you said, like an old tree. And go look at like kokofu. trees. I bet you like every other tree is going to have a bar branch on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it is. It's funny that some people lean so hard into it. So one of those instances is like developed old trees that when you get to that crown, there's like almost no way with all that compression in the top of the crown of the tree and the placement of the branches and the given species of the tree might also go kind of run against you.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a bar branch somewhere. Sometimes you can't build a dense crown without having a bar branch. Now you can, but then also sometimes when it comes to the way that branches are laid out naturally in trees naturally grow bar branches all the time.
Oh, yeah.
They just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
There's no formula, And then another instance where a bar branch is kind of like looked past is in shohin or mame. If the entire tree is built off of two branches, literally, and they might be a bar branch, but the way that the shohin is built, you can't tell because of the way the canopy's been laid on it.
Right. If you have a conifer and the bar branch is completely like you can't see it because of where your canopy is, it's not as big of a deal as if you have like a maple and your bottom two branches are bar branches. Like there's a lot more forgiveness, I think, within conifers, especially of a small size. Ideally, if you can avoid it, you want to avoid it, but there's a certain point at which like you either can't avoid it, it'll ruin the tree if you remove it, tree's so old, or it's not the most important part of the design.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to keep saying just the controversial, goofy things that I say. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not really a huge fan of cascades. Oh, actually, I like bar branches. And it's like stupid shit like that. But
it makes
like
the tree really easy to pick up. No, I'm just kidding. Don't pick your trees up by their branches.
you could do like a sitting, what's that called? Where you have a weight.
Like a bench press, with your, not with your arms, with the leg press thing.
Oh yeah, you can do like a leg press. There's another one where you like pick the weight up with both arms and you kind of pull it like up like past your knees to your chin. You can do that workout as well. That's a good workout.
You can deadlift it.
Yeah, deadlifting is different, Carmen.
Okay, that's when you pick up a dead bonsai above your head.
Yes, exactly.
That's a deadlift.
That's when you get frustrated and you give it like the whole circle of life thing, except it's sad. And you kind of like say, why did I do this?
And then you chuck it into the garbage.
Yeah, you chuck it into like the trash bin. Make sure you take your pot. You don't throw your pot away too. Right. But bar branches are fine, but they're not correct. According to Japanese stylists, they're not correct. Mm-hmm. But when
they look funny, they mess up your balance. It's
yeah. And if you have a bar branch that's so strong, so bar branch on a tree, that's very obvious is if you look at a tree and say you got a Milwaukee informal upright.
I can't remember what it is now. Moyogi?
There you go. You got it. It's okay. We've
been talking for a while.
We have to make a show
words are hard.
Where we use an English language where there's like not that many words and some of our words repeat. That was one of the things that Laurent pointed out to me. Actually, he was like, "Why is this word spelled the same, but it's said the same way, and then means something 100% different?" I'm like, "English, bro. We don't have many words in the roster.
I don't know. We're not very creative.
We have to be multi-purpose words. There's a name for them, but I can't remember. But I'm also not an English major or creative writer. So, but anyway, when a bar branch is when a bar branch is obvious. It's whenever it's like in a informal or a formal upright, and there's a branch, that first branch, and then another branch like runs on the other side of the trunk of it, and they're like almost the same size. Mm-hmm. That's when it's glaringly obvious. Mm-hmm. But when it's up in the canopy and they're like the same size and they're close to each other, then it's not that obvious. But then there's also the thing, it's like the back branch sometimes is a bar branch, but it's just like has a different orientation. It's been wired differently.
Mm-hmm. That's you can't see it from the front. Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. But horticulturally speaking, if you have a bar branch that's too strong in one spot with a main branch and they both grow at the same rate, they're going to cause a swell. That's something that a lot of people talk about a lot. It's like,
that's true.
And when I'm developing deciduous trees, I'm going to go back to deciduous stuff here. Conifers, you can do whatever you want in some cases. Like I've seen conifers with bar branches. I've seen one branch on a conifer and it's been like wired and coiled up like a snake to build the tree.
Damn, I'm not gonna. Oh well, to build the tree. Okay.
Yeah. In some cases you can, unless you're doing like perfect and you're like grafting.
I've done that with the procumbens. Instead of taking the leader off, I just snaked it around and made it a branch.
Made like a weird back branch thing that also carries like a good load of the foliage mass. With deciduous trees, I find myself working on like, especially when you have a really dense like elm is kind of like where you get to this point. You must get to this point where there's a lot of branches, and sometimes branches occur from the same place. And someone's like, you got to take that off. It's going to cause a swell. And
Trident maple too.
Well, trident maple, yeah, they're kind of offensive.
They will create a swell. Anyway, sorry, go ahead. I'm interrupting.
Yeah, but some trees I say no. And it sounds weird. And then people are like, well, then it's going to be inverse. And I'm like, but a lot of deciduous trees, especially a broom style, what do you do there? You're like, oh, shoot.
Well, that's different. That's a broom.
That's different. But is that a bar branch?
Well, it shouldn't be because of where the angles are, but
they all occur from the same spot. But they're not straight across from each other. That's another thing that we're trying I'm trying to
it's not a bar branch.
The
they're not straight across from each other. They're just all coming from the same spot.
So a bar branch creates a bar across the tree where your line is drawn across the tree. And that breaks your trunk line, which is not elegant. It makes the viewer go up, and then suddenly you have this really strong disconnect. It feels like the top of the tree is like, it's like a cookie jar. You could like pick up the top of the tree and look in and then caught red-handed, look at trying to get some cookies. But like, that's kind of how it makes me feel. It's like there's a severed line, there's like a dotted line in the tree. You know? So, but then in a broom, it's like, that's a different type of branch that could be arguably called a whirling branch setup, but it's not. But then also, if we're doing naturalistic stylings of trees, bar branches are so common, especially in elm trees. That's why I mentioned them earlier. We're doing a broom style, but if we're doing a multiple trunk tree, then we kind of fall out of that category, and then you do get bar branches, but then the bar branches don't go straight all the way out because we have a deciduous tree. It goes out, and then up slightly, and then that kind of fixes the bar branch slightly, but it doesn't though. So it's like,
so what are you saying here, Evan?
It's contradicting. I've seen great looking bar branches on deciduous stylings, a little bit more of a naturalistic style, but it's not right. But at the same time, it's not wrong. It's what
right.
You know, I know. It's like I talked in a circle and came back around and like this. Like it's like, oh, I solved it when I talked in a circle about bar branches on deciduous trees, but I didn't, because the only branches I'm worried about on deciduous tree when I'm removing branches is suckering branches off the base of a branch. Those are the only ones I'm usually typically worried about, because that'll cause a swell in a heartbeat. But it won't cause a swell in the trunk line.
Your dog has feelings about this issue.
I know, she's barking because people exist outside of our house. But yeah, the trunk line can be interrupted is my biggest concern. Beyond that, as long as there's a way that the tree's built that it's not so obvious, like you said, it can be hidden. But then another thing has to be put into mind is like, oh yeah, bar branch and deciduous tree becomes blatantly obvious when it loses its leaves. So it's another thing. But if you can gracefully break the rules with a bar branch, then you might be getting somewhere. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. So I think general rule of thumb is try to avoid bar branches
when they're young.
Yes. And then at a certain point, sometimes they're okay. Generally speaking, you don't want them. But again, everything depends in bonsai.
Yeah, everything depends. And I mean, we cut up a bar branch, we create a big scar. That's always my biggest issue with deciduous trees.
Why you cut it off when it's young if you can.
Yeah. So you don't want to cause a big scar or a weird spot. I mean, you could take a huge chunk out of the trunk of the tree and just make it look really weird too. So there's a couple of things like that. But yeah, we're getting towards the end here. We can go ahead and wind it down here. Do the couple of shout outs that we always do at the end. Talk about, ourselves for once. No, we talk about ourselves often, honestly. But for more content, if you like this show, you might like to pop on over to Underhill Bonsai and read some articles that I wrote. I get into moments where I write like a handful and then I stop. So I apologize if they're out of date. At least there's some written from this year. That's something. But yeah, you can go over there and read some articles. Underhill Bonsai has a YouTube channel. There's a couple of instructional videos that I used to do on there. Lots of bald cypress stuff, obviously, but and then you go over to Underhill on Instagram, follow us there. And also to mention, Little Things has an Instagram. If you ever run into a critique episode on our show, then you can pop on over to Instagram and follow us there. And usually the description will tell you what episode the critique photos line up with. And then for you, Carmen, they can go over to...
You can follow me on Instagram at Becoming Bonsai. I am also on Facebook. And you can check out the Purple Pot Society, which is the National Women's Bonsai Group, at the Purple Pot Society. Oh, sorry, purplepotsociety.org. There's no the in front of it. And yeah.
Becoming Bonsai?
Yep, said that one.
Oh, okay. Sorry. My dog was barking and distracting me.
That's okay. I did it out of order this time.
No, it's okay. And then for Mike, which we have when we can get him, Mike's a very, very busy guy, but Mike
busy.
Lane, you go over to kitsunebonsai.com. He's got seasonal offerings as far as he's got some online classes that he's been promoting recently. And also he's like traveling a lot as far as teaching and doing workshops. You can catch him in Texas a good bit. He comes to Louisiana. He travels up and down to Florida. So if you're local to Florida and you want to learn bonsai, I mean, you're lucky because you got a great guy over there to teach you bonsai. So go over to Kitsune Bonsai on Instagram. Go over to kitsunebonsai.com. And then he's on Facebook, but Facebook's kind of a different world when it comes to trying to friend people. But you can at least look at some of his stuff there. And then, just like I mentioned before, make sure to go over to underhillbonsaistore.com and go over and pick up a Little Things shirt. Help me get some of the stock moved on that, and we'll print some new shirts, different colors, different designs. Remember to go over to patreon.com/Little Things for Bonsai People. Become a $5 patron to get your name shouted out at the beginning of every episode. Go join our Discord community. Everybody there is awesome. We always have great things going on to talk about the cutting challenge. Trees that we critique on the show come from our Discord a lot. Listener questions and remarks come from the Discord, so it's a great place to be. And yeah, like again, thank you Bonsai Bar for sponsoring this show, and also thank you Bonsai Central, the show in St. Louis, coming up here soon in next May 2024. Thank you guys so much for sponsoring our show. So, but yeah, this has been a good one. It's refreshing to go back to just like simpler time. It was
simpler times.
Yeah.
Fewer critiques, not fewer opinions. You have opinions on all the things, but different opinions.
Yeah. And I know there was an outcry for more opinions and more spiritual, more, retrospective, introspective,
It'll come along as it comes along.
Every once in a while when we feel like it, we'll do more. But yeah, it's cool to go back and just remember, like I was mentioning earlier, just remember what we're talking about here is bonsai, and especially from the beginning stages and forward. But yeah, thanks for hanging out, Carmen, and
anytime.
And also for your listeners, thanks for listening and hanging out with us on Little Things for Bonsai People. Y'all have a great day.
Bye.